right, so let's start off with a chant.
1, 2, 3, 4. Money for schools, not for war. 1, 2, 3, 4. Money for jobs, not for war. 1, 2, 3, 4. Money for jobs, not for war. 1, 2, 3, 4. Money for jobs, not for war. All right, I want to introduce who's going to be our MC for this event. Thank you all for coming. Andy Thayer from the Gay Liberation Network. Let's give him a round of
All
applause.
right, Andy.
Thank you very much. Thank you for coming out on this day when we are attempting to start rebuilding the anti-war movement here in Chicago. There have been many diligent individual activists and small organizations who have been engaged in these tasks, come what may, over the last several years, but it's about time we started building a large anti-war movement.
Yeah.
The United States is probably bombing more countries in the world over the last few years than at any time since World War II. That should be one reason. Another reason, just 50 years ago, down the street here, was a signal event in the history of anti-war movements around the world. I'm talking about the Chicago 1968 Democratic Convention. It led to a sea change of opinion within the anti-war movement as people recognized that neither of the major parties were going to stop the wars. It had to be the people themselves. And so this march here today, this rally, is a warm-up for a much bigger march, and I think politically more important march, on August 25th, the 50th anniversary of the Democratic National Convention here in Chicago. So put that on your calendar, and you'll be hearing more about that in the days ahead. Before I go any farther, though, I'd like to tell you about one of the co-founders of the newly formed Chicago Anti-War Coalition. We've got a lot of co-founders here in the audience, but I want to tell you about one particular one. His name is Larry Duncan, and we lost him 1 week ago today. Larry Duncan, for those who don't know him, was active in various movements for probably more than a half a century. And he was probably the single most important labor journalist in this town for the last 2 decades at least as long as I knew him. And we lost him. And yet just a few weeks ago, he was hosting meetings of the Anti-War Coalition over at the United Electrical Workers Hall. So keep Larry in your thoughts today. Which gives me a segue to what we're all here about today. Because Larry's death was unintentional. It was a tragic accident. But the deaths we see in places like Palestine today, as sharpshooters from the Israeli government have mowed down at least a few dozen unarmed demonstrators and injured hundreds more, or the people who have been slaughtered in Syria by various proxy forces, including from the United States, or the people who are needlessly dying of cholera in Yemen, or the people who are died resisting the coups in places like Honduras, Egypt, and the Maldives, or the secret war in Mexico, where the United States supplies at least 3/4 of the arms. These are not unintentional deaths. These deaths are government policy funded and supplied right here from the United States. And that's why we need to build a new anti-war movement to resist that. Now I'm going to shut up here and I'm going to hand it over to my good friend here, Rich Whitney, who is a leader in the Illinois Green Party, longtime stalwart anti-war activist, who is going to introduce our first speaker.
Thank you, Andy. Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon. Thank you for being here. Are we ready to stop some wars? Yeah. All right. All right. There's so many of them, right? 7 different countries that we've been bombing in recent years: Pakistan, Yemen, Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, Syria. It's just mind-boggling what we're doing. In the first 9 months of 2017, the United States government dropped over 30,000 bombs and missiles on these nations. And it's not even a blip in the corporate media. We are here to say that we recognize it, and we're demanding that it be stopped. We demand that this government, the government of the United States, stop murdering people overseas. I'd like to introduce our first speaker. We're fortunate to have with us today one of the leaders of the national anti-war movement, Joe Lombardo. Joe Lombardo is the co-coordinator of the United National Anti-War Coalition and is on the executive committee of the Coalition Against U.S. Foreign Military Bases, which called nationwide demonstrations, the spring actions of which this is a part here today. He's a lifelong anti-war activist and was on the staff of the National Peace Action Coalition, one of the 2 major coalitions that organized against the Vietnam War. He's traveled extensively in the U.S. and abroad speaking on issues of peace and justice. He is also a trade unionist, a member of the CSEA, AFSCME Local 1000, and a delegate to the Troy Area Labor Council in New York. He's come all the way from New York to be here with us today. Joe Lombardo.
Thank you, Rich. You all look great here today. Rich is one of the people that brought the Green Party nationally into UNAC, the largest national anti-war coalition today. The last time I was here at a demonstration, I believe it was 2012. It was when NATO was here. And we had a large demonstration. If you go to the Facebook event for this action, you'll see a big picture of people marching under, do you call it a subway here? Under the L or whatever it's called. New York, we call it a subway. And that was a picture of that demonstration. It was one of the first times I understood the militarization of the police, because all the media told the world and the people of Chicago that the anti-war movement was coming to Chicago, and they are violent people. They're there to oppose NATO, and NATO is the peaceful people. Imagine how they can twist things and stand them on their head. And when you realize that, and when you listen to the US news, the corporate media, and you realize they stand things on their head, you can get a little bit of what the real picture in the world is. But the reason that I understood what the militarization of the police was, because they brought the police in from all over the Midwest to Chicago. And they lined the march route that we had. And they looked like Darth Vader. They had these helmets and these suits on. I couldn't believe it. And this city spent millions of dollars for security for that action. And at the end of the action, when there was no violence on the part of the anti-war movement, the police made sure there was violence. And they stopped people from leaving the demonstration. And their clubs came out, and people were hospitalized. And in that way, they justified the millions of your tax dollars they paid for this. Well, this demonstration today is part of the national actions that mostly took place last weekend. When national actions were called, we understood it's difficult to call things several months in advance, because just about every week something new is happening in the world that we have to respond to. And we didn't know if things would happen in the middle or when would happen. But what happened right before that weekend, first we started seeing the massacre of the Palestinian people. Unarmed people protesting within the borders of Gaza were being shot down by Israeli forces. And if you saw it, if you saw some of the videos, they were taking aim, they were laughing, they were cheering at the people they were killing. And it's the US government that gave them the courage to do this, because it was our president, Trump, not our president, their president, someone's president, who decided we're going to move our embassy to Jerusalem and declare that the capital of Israel. And that gave them the courage to arrest more children, like Ahad Tamimi, and to shoot others down. But also, right before last weekend, we saw U.S. missiles fly once again in Syria. These are humanitarian missiles, in case you didn't know. They were shot for humanitarian reasons because they said there was gas being used, even though the UN and Russia and others and the Syrian government got rid of their chemicals, and that was verified by the UN inspectors. But they said there was gas used. Now, why would gas be used when the last of these groups, these terrorist groups that were lobbing mortars and missiles and killing people in Damascus, but that's never said on our media, had surrendered and had agreed to go on buses up to the north of Syria? Why at that moment would Syria do something which they know would bring down this kind of response? It doesn't make any sense. And more now, as reporters get in there, they are starting to debunk this whole thing. They can't find anybody that has seen these chemicals that have supposedly been there. The U.S. lies. The U.S. lies to get you into war. That's what weapons of mass destruction were. That's what the Gulf of Tonkin incident was. They now agree that that never happened. But 4 million Vietnamese were killed during the Vietnam War. And remember the Gulf War? Remember that woman who came before Congress and said the Iraqi troops are throwing people out of incubators and killing them? Well, she was never even there. She was the daughter of the Kuwaiti ambassador. The U.S. government knew they were lying to the American people and knew they were lying to Congress, which is supposed to be a felony, but it led to war, and thousands more died. The United States is the aggressor everywhere in the world. The U.S. has 20 times the number of foreign military bases as all other countries in the world combined. And yet they charge everybody else as a threat to the United States. Our military budget is the largest in the world, and even larger with the recent increase of $80 billion, larger than the next 14 countries in the world, their military budgets. In fact, it is almost as large as the military budget of the rest of the world. The $80 billion increase in the U.S. military budget is more than the military budget of Russia. And Russia's a threat to us. We have that country surrounded. We had said when the Soviet Union fell that we would never go into the Warsaw Pact countries or to the Soviet countries that were part of the Soviet Union. We are now in 11 of them. We in the United States have to build a movement because the world depends on us. I have taken many trips overseas. I spoke after NATO came here, the next time they were in Wales, I spoke there. I spoke at other places. And they all look to an American anti-war voice. They depend upon us. So I'm really happy to be here. I'm really happy to hear Andy Thayer, who along with helped build that massive demonstration that took place against NATO, say we are building a movement, because that's what we're doing all over the country. Last weekend there were demonstrations in over 40 cities around the country. And the new anti-war movement is not just against the wars overseas, we are against the wars at home too. There's a clear connection. When they started talking about that we have a war against terror, they started identifying people that they could claim are terrorists in the United States. Some of them were arrested actually at that NATO rally here. The anti-war movement did not do enough to defend the 3 people that were arrested. But they sent FBI people into a bunch of young people that came up, some of them from Florida, and said, you're not being revolutionary enough. You need to make Molotov cocktails. You're not being revolutionary enough. And some young kids said, okay, maybe we'll do it. They didn't do it, but they were arrested. But the war on terror was a war against Muslims. And in this country, the FBI sent people into mosques all over the country and tried to get people to do the same thing that those 3 did. And most of them said, no, no, never. They tried to bribe them. They did whatever they could to get them to agree to something that they could say is illegal. And today there are hundreds of Muslims in prisons that never did anything. Never did anything. Some of them contributed to causes in the Middle East, and they were put in prison for that. The U.S. admits that there are over 600 Muslims in prison. They have, in this country, they have special Muslim prisons they don't tell you about. They're called CMUs, Communication Management Units, where they're held in tight solitary confinement, many for all of their lives. But it wasn't just the Islamophobia and the racism that we've seen. We've talked about the militarization of the police that took place. In Ferguson, many of the people that were coming back from the war in Iraq only months before, kicking down doors and sending people to places like Abu Ghraib to be tortured, were now on the police force. In Ferguson, they wore khaki uniforms. They had military vehicles. They didn't say it was the community that they are there to protect and serve. They said it was the enemy. They called these people the enemy. So when you shoot down the enemy, you have a reason for doing it. And they've been shooting down blacks all across this country. As they deport more and more people and break up families, these people are supposed to have family values that maybe some of them have been living here for decades, throwing them out. That's all part of the racism. That's all part of the anti-immigration feeling. That's all part of the Islamophobia. That's all part of the war at home. And now they're militarizing the border in the South. So when we fight against the wars abroad, we must also fight against the wars at home. And when that connection is made in our minds, and the people that are turning out in the streets to oppose police violence and oppose the immigrant jails and the mass incarceration, when those connections are made, we will build a movement in this country that is unstoppable. And together, here in Chicago, in New York, in San Francisco, and other places that marched last week and will continue to march as we build that movement that Andy Thayer talked about, we can only win because history is on our side, and by every poll, the majority is on our side. So thank you for being here today. Thank you for inviting me. And I look forward to being here many times in the future.
I mentioned the loss a week ago today of Larry Duncan. We lost another stalwart fighter just a few days ago, Bill Massey. For those who don't know Bill was a stalwart. He would come out in the worst kind of weather. We can complain about what's out here today. I saw him out at Michigan and near Chicago just a few months ago in some really lousy Chicago weather. He was out there. He was out in the streets for decades. Bill Massey of the Party of Socialism and Liberation. Let's give a moment of silence for both Bill and Larry. Let's keep them in our thoughts, and let's fight. Let's fight so that people are not needlessly killed, not just the accidental deaths. Our next speaker is a Yemeni American. She hails from Harvard University. She knows her stuff. She gave a great presentation last night at Loyola University. Sorry I wasn't able to make it, but I hope it was live streamed and people can check it out. Yemen, for those who don't know, is one of the United States' biggest proxy wars. The United States has been supplying the Saudi dictatorship to bomb the hell out of Yemen and has created, according to, I believe it's the United Nations, the worst cholera epidemic in modern history. Thousands dead thanks to the United States arming and air supplying of Saudi jets as they bomb Yemen. Let's welcome up Shireen Al-Ademi. I'm sorry, Shireen, if I butchered the pronunciation of your name. Let's give a warm Chicago welcome to Shireen. Thank you so much, Shireen.
Thank you so much for being here, for having me here today. I'm joining you from Boston to speak to you about a war that you probably don't hear about very much, but it is being conducted in your name, in my country of birth, Yemen. Since 2015, Saudi Arabia has been bombing Yemen for no other reason than to assert control over a country that really posed no threat to Saudi Arabian security or U.S. security. They have bombed homes, hospitals, schools, funerals, weddings, and even refugees trying to escape the war in boats. U.S. Saudi-led airstrikes have killed at least 10,000 people, but the UN stopped counting in January 2017. And just yesterday, they bombed an amusement park called Fun City. In Yemen, this is seen as a US-Saudi war on their country. It's not only killed tens of thousands, but it's displaced millions of people internally and have starved people to death. In 2016 and 2017, 113,000 children died because of malnutrition and preventable diseases. 113,000 children. That's the number of all children born in Chicago in the past 3 years. These children died because there's no food in the country. There's no clean water. Saudi Arabia, with the help of the United States Navy, has been imposing a total land, sea, and air blockade that has trapped people in the country and has kept food, medicine, and water out. Ordinary people like you and me are not able to find food or fuel or water. The country's been without electricity for 3 years, and major cities have run out of fuel entirely. People have been working without salaries for the past 2 years. If a child gets sick, they don't know what to do. The hospitals are not functioning because they've been bombed by Saudi airstrikes. And not just that, the US not only trains Saudi soldiers, it doesn't just advise them, it doesn't just help them target people, it refuels Saudi jets mid-air as they're bombing civilian targets. Simply put, these are US aircraft bombing civilians with US bombs, and they're being refueled by the US Army. And of course, we've sold hundreds of billions dollars worth of arms to the Saudi Arabians and the United Arab Emirates to launch this war in Yemen. And we've been continuing to do that throughout the Obama administration and the Trump administration. This makes us just as complicit in the war as Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. Yemeni citizens have done nothing to deserve this. Yemen is the poorest country in the Middle East. They were relying on food, 90% of their food from imports, and now they can no longer receive the food that they desperately need. 80% of the population is in dire need of humanitarian aid. And when the UN says that this is the world's worst humanitarian crisis, it is not an exaggeration. But you and I can stop this war. Congress has already declared it unconstitutional, and senators like Bernie Sanders, Chris Murphy, and Rand Paul have been trying to introduce legislation in the House and in the Senate to try to bring about an end to the US complicity in the war on Yemen. It may just take a few minutes of your time, but please call your representatives. Tell them that you don't want this war conducted in your name. Tell them to get out of Yemen, and tell them not to wait. Yemen can't wait. People are dying every day. In the 5 minutes that I spoke, a child has already died of malnutrition and hunger. So please call your senators and keep telling people about this war, because it's being conducted in our name for no other reason than pure profit. Thank you so much for being here.
I prefer positive feedback, thank you. All right. One of the gratifying things, thank you, Shireen, very much for that. Appreciate that. Let's thank Shireen again. Yes. One of the gratifying things about organizing this new Chicago anti-war coalition is that we're finding new alliances, we're finding new groups of people that are coming out. It's not the same old peace movement. There are new forces coming together. One of the organizations that is that has joined our coalition is a group by the name of the Black is Back Coalition. And here to tell us a few words about it is Cam Howard. Cam?
The Black is Back Coalition for Social Justice, Peace, and Reparations was started in 2008. Some of the co-founders was Omali Yeshitela of the African People's Socialist Party, Glenn Ford of the Black Agenda Report, Dorothy Lewis of NCOBRA, the National Coalition of Blacks for Reparations in America, and Afia Mwanganza of the Malcolm X Grassroots Movement. One of our newest coalition members is Ajamu Baraka for the Black Alliance of Peace for Peace and former vice presidential candidate of the Green Party. The Black is Back Coalition has a statement that we prepared in regards to the U.S. bombing on Syria, and I would like to read that statement. But first, if you can join me in saying, U.S. out of Syria, police out of the black community. U.S. out of Syria, police out of the black community. The Black is Back Coalition for Social Justice, Peace, and Reparations condemns in the strongest possible terms the lawless bombing of Syria by the imperialist bandits of the U.S., France, and England. We know that the proclaimed reason for the illegal action by the U.S. and the colonial powers of France and England was contrived to justify escalation of the war against Syrian people and the government by the U.S. following the recent declaration of President Trump that troops would be withdrawn from its colonial occupation of that land. The Black is Back Coalition knows that the story of the Syrian use of chemical weapons against the Al-Qaeda and other terrorist forces warring against the government of Syria is contrived because the U.S. was itself involved in the 2013 and 2014 inspections of the Syrian chemical weapons materials and capacity and participated in their destruction. We recognize that if it is all true that chemical weapons were actually used in Syria, there's a greater likelihood that they were used by the warmongering state of Israel or by other elements of the U.S. state opposed to U.S. military withdrawal from that region. The Black is Back Coalition is accustomed to the lies of the U.S. government and its several police agencies every time they murder unarmed black men, women, and children throughout the U.S. We also oppose the aggression against people in the government of Syria because African people refuse to be cannon fodder for any more of the unjust wars of U.S. imperialism. To paraphrase Muhammad Ali, when he refused to be drafted in the U.S. Army to fight against the courageous Vietnamese people, we say, and I quote, "Ain't no Syrian police killing black people in the U.S." When it comes to fighting a war against people and government of Syria or any other oppressed people of the world for the white nationalist U.S. imperialist government, the Black is Back Coalition, remembering the words of the U.S. assassinated Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., that said the U.S. is the greatest purveyor of violence in the world. And we say, hell no, we won't go. The Black is Back Coalition also recognizes the duplicity of the logic that the attack on Syria is in defense of the Syrian people from the government of Bashar, who it is claimed is using chemical weapons against his own people. We recognize that if this logic were to apply here to the U.S., then Russia or any other power would be justified in bombing the Ferguson police station or the Chicago police station or any other police station in America where there's a large majority of black people. The Black is Back Coalition for Social Justice, Peace, and Reparations stands in solidarity with the organizers of this march and is calling on all African and freedom-loving people to reject the brutal act of colonial aggression against the Syrian people and to join in this and all political actions to protest the U.S.-led missile attacks on Syria. U.S. out of Syria. U.S. out of Syria. Police out of the black community. U.S. out of Syria. Police out of the black community. U.S. out of Syria. Police out of the black community. Thank you.
Thank you, Cam Howard and the Black is Back Coalition. In a moment here, I'm going to ask Chuy Negrete to come up. If Chuy could make your way to the stage here. Chuy is a longtime and much beloved performer here in Chicago. But, you know, there's always a price to pay. And guess what? I'm the one who gets to make the announcement. Now, I mentioned earlier that we're going to be having a march on the 50th anniversary of the Democratic National Convention here in Chicago, because the actions that happened after that convention showed how wars are really stopped. It was really the first war in U.S. history that was stopped by the people right around the world as well as here in this country. Now, you know the city of Chicago. You know the city of Chicago back then and how Richard J. Daley refused to give permits for peaceful marchers. Well, guess what? Some of us have had that sort of fun in decades subsequent. And yet we are going to be applying for permits. The way that we fought for permits in advance of the NATO 2012 summit here in Chicago, and we don't expect the city of Chicago to be any friends about that. That's going to take money. It's going to take insurance. It's going to take probably court battles, because unlike today, we are going to be marching in the streets on Saturday, August 25th, because they are our streets. But that's going to take your help, because we're going to be applying for these permits next week, and it's going to take some money and the court battle subsequent. So please give generously to these buckets that are going to be circulating through the crowd right now. Give it to Rogers there. Is Chuy is not. Oh, there we are. Please, Chuy, make yourself at home here.
All right, thank you. Órale. Así es. Obreros unidos jamás serán vencidos. Old is new and new is old. I always like to sing songs of our past labor singers. And no one did more than Woody Guthrie. And Pete Seeger. This first song is about a woman named Lucy Gonzalez Parsons. Orale, orale. And I'm gonna mix it up with other comrade sisters that were in the struggle. And last week I did the protest of the tax resistors, and everybody on that committee were over 65. Orale. So me being 68, and look around you, you know. We've been in the struggle a long time. Dice Lucy Gonzalez that day at the factory gate. Dice Lucy Gonzalez that day at the factory gate. Que no se raje nadie before it is too late. Dice Lucy Gonzalez that day at the factory gate. Brown, red, black, and white, all the workers must unite. Everybody, brown, red, black, and white, all the workers must unite. But the police, they did come that day at the factory gate. Vino la policía y vino la represión. But it was Lucy Gonzalez that day at the factory gate. She told them that day at the factory gate. Don't listen to these bosses. Don't listen to their lies. Mentirosos. Don't listen to these bosses. Don't listen to their lies. We poor folks haven't got a chance unless we organize. Order everybody, clap your hands. Yeah. Brown, red, black, and white, all the workers must unite. Brown, red, black, and white, all the workers must unite. But the repression, it did come that day at the factory gate. But it was Lucy Gonzalez that day at the factory gate. Her husband was Albert Parsons that day at the factory gate. But he had died long before at the Haymarket, they did say. And when he died, he would tell her that day at the factory gate. Don't listen to these bosses. Don't listen to their lies. Mentirosos. We poor folks haven't got a chance unless we. Orale. Brown, red, black, and white, all the workers must unite. Brown, red, black, and white, all the workers must unite. In domination and in our struggles against domination, culture is always of salient importance. Because culture represents the context in which the struggles of men and women take place. Dice Lucy Gonzalez that day at the factory gate, que no se raje nadie. That day at the factory gate, podemos aguantar hambre. She told them, we will sustain. Let no one fall back. That day at the factory gate. Brown, red, black, and white, all the workers must unite. Brown, red, black and white, all the workers must unite. Pero vino la policía y vino la represión. Vino la policía that day at the factory gate. 15 dead, they died that day at the factory gate. 35 injured that day at the factory gate. But as they led her away, Lucy Gonzalez, she did say, as they led her away, Lucy Gonzalez, she did say, don't listen to these bosses, don't listen to their lies. We poor folks haven't got a chance unless we. Órale, everybody clap your hands. Yeah. Huelga, huelga, huelga. Huelga, it means strike. Huelga, huelga, huelga. We have just begun to fight. Huelga, huelga, huelga. Huelga, it means strike. Huelga, huelga, huelga. We just begun to fight. Don't let me walk out the door and die in El Salvador. Don't let me walk out the door. Say no to war. Brown, red, black, and white. All the workers must unite. Brown, red, black, and white. All the workers must unite. Woo, 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 woo. All right, I just want to say that my wife Rita up here, right there she is. We have a few CDs of this song, and if you buy a CD, part of that we're gonna throw into the bucket. For upcoming rallies. And now we bring you back to our moderator here. Órale. Ándale.
Thank you, Chewy. You know, there's something to be said for persistence, and our next speaker has been at this for quite a while. She's going to say a few words about the situation regarding our nation's relations with North Korea and the Korean Peninsula. For over 50 years, Betty Resnikoff has been organizing for peace and justice. She is a member of the Albany Park, North Park, and Mayfair Neighbors for Peace and Justice. Please welcome Betty Resnikoff. Oh, okay. Or do you want it on here? Okay.
Hi, everyone. Hi. I'm here today to tell you about two aims that I have. First, I'm here to condemn the U.S. war against North Korea that's been going on for 65 years. 65 years. Thank you. And the second, I want to call on you to mobilize people to end the crimes of U.S. imperialism. At the end of World War II, the U.S. saw an opportunity to take over countries from the Japanese Empire, including China, Vietnam, and Korea. But freedom fighters in all these countries were not about to give up their chance for independence. In Korea, in 1948, the freedom fighters in the North set up their base in liberated territory. They established the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. In 1950, the U.S. brought its war machine to get control of the whole peninsula. They killed over 2 million Koreans. That's 20% of the population. The U.S. used Koreans who had collaborated with the Japanese to create a puppet government in the South under the domination of the U.S. empire. In 1953, the U.S. refused to sign a peace treaty with the DPRK. For 65 years, it has tried and failed to overthrow the North Korean government. North Korea has repeatedly called for negotiations. Instead, the U.S. built over 81 military bases in the South, stationing 30,000 troops there. These are mostly our impoverished youth who were pulled into the military and trained to kill or be killed. Do we want billions from our taxes for this? Twice a year, the U.S. organizes war games on land, sea, and air with live ammunition. The U.S. is trying to terrorize not only North Korea, but also Russia and China. Yet, Trump screams that North Korea is endangering the world. What about the gigantic U.S. nuclear stockpile? But the U.S. is very worried. It fears reunification of the two parts of Korea. This might well weaken its plans to dominate Asia. 17 years ago, the North and South Koreans signed a joint declaration for reunification. Every year they celebrate this plan. Recently, South Koreans elected President Moon, who had promised he would work for reunification. At the March Olympics, athletes from the North and South marched in together, carrying a flag displaying the whole Korean peninsula. Then, North and South officials held several meetings without the U.S. Remember that before these developments, in his speech at the UN, Trump screamed that the U.S. would annihilate North Korea. North Korea answered that if the U.S. dared to start bombing, it would retaliate, and its nuclear missiles could now reach the U.S. After all this, Trump says he will negotiate, but he also said that before negotiating, he would use maximum pressure. So this month, Trump ordered the military to go ahead with war games. He also imposed more crippling sanctions. This is economic warfare, interfering with North Korea's trade with 120 countries. Will Congress people now insist on fair negotiations? Whose interests do they represent? All of them put their hands out for corporate contributions. Take the case of Senator Bernie Sanders. When Trump said he would impose sanctions, Sanders echoed him, saying that more sanctions are definitely needed. Let's face it, there is no congressperson or president who has opposed all aggressive U.S. wars. They enable the government to violate international law and interfere in other countries and start wars, all for the benefit of corporations and banks. What does this tell us? It is only the mass movements of the people here and abroad which can stop the U.S. empire from trampling on the sovereignty of other countries and using our money and our youth to do it. Please take a fact sheet on North Korea because it can be helpful when you talk to other people. And you must do that. We cannot end with demonstration. We must go out to the people. Join me in saying, the people united will never be defeated. The people united will never be defeated. En español, el pueblo unido jamás será vencido. El pueblo unido jamás será vencido. And no more wars for U.S. empire. No more wars for U.S. empire. No more wars for U.S. empire.
Thank you.
Thank you, Betty Resnikoff. Next up, we have Ann Sheets of the Illinois Single Payer Alliance. We know that when we drop bombs, we're losing health care, we're losing public transportation, we're losing housing. Let's give it up for Ann.
We believe in health care for all, the care of health of all of us, of all the people of the world. No bombs, no bombing of hospitals, no bombing of food sources, no bombing of homes, no blockades. We believe in food for all. That is food for the people of Yemen, food for the people of the United States who need food stamps that are being denied them. We mean that every woman in the world and every parent, every man has the right to raise children and also to decide not to raise children. No bombing of women and children and pregnant women at the same time that we deny access to prenatal vitamins by forcing people to pay for them when they have no money. When we denied access to contraception, we deny access to abortion, and then we put black women in jail for having an adverse outcome of their pregnancy. We say no to this, that every person in the world has a right to life, and we all have the right to raise our children. Cholera epidemics in Yemen and the re-emergence of diseases of fecal contamination in this country when people are forced to pay out of pocket for sewer connections. We say no to that, and we say yes to food and water, safe food and water and air for everyone. What we have seen is millions of dollars in payments to the CEOs of military contractors at the same time that someone in this country has to wait 2 years to get a repair on a wheelchair that allows them to leave home. This is wrong. We see millions of dollars going to contractors for the military at the same time that nursing assistants earn poverty-level wages. We see the VA under the threat of privatization and veterans denied care because they are deported or because they get dishonorable discharges or because they have pre-existing conditions or some other reason. And when we try to have accountability at the VA, the people who are fired are not the managers, but the housekeeping assistants. How better to destroy a healthcare institution than by terrorizing the people who clean it? Instead of that, we work for health care for all, the care of all of our lives, mutual. And we say, everybody in, nobody out. We mean the whole world. Everybody in, nobody out. Thank you.
Riker, thank you. Right, Randy? Okay, we're pleased here today. Get this. We have a real journalist here today. That's right, a real journalist. Randy Nord has written frequently on the war against Yemen as well as on other struggles in the Middle East. She is co-founder of Geopolitics Alert, an independent world news website with thousands of monthly readers, and a regular contributor at Mint Press News. Her work has been featured on Shafaqni News, Yemen Press Agency, and several other outlets. She's a member of the Michigan Emergency Committee Against War and Injustice and the Detroit branch of Workers' World Party. Thanks for coming all the way from Michigan, Randy Nord.
Thank you, everyone. Like to just start out by kind of talking about what we deal with at Geopolitics Alert. We write for a broad range of people across the political spectrum, and people often ask us, can you really blame all of the problems that you talk about in your stories on U.S. involvement in the Middle East? And absolutely, yes, you can, because that's what the United States does. They support the Gulf countries like Saudi Arabia, and they sell arms to sectarian groups to stir up conflict and create chaos. And that's what the United States uses to carry out occupation and oppression in other nations and keep them submissive to their will. And I'd like to talk about a country you never, ever hear in the news. Not Syria, not even Yemen, but Libya. When was the last time you heard anything about Libya in the news? Barely ever, because they've completely failed there and destroyed the country. Before the NATO invasion of Libya, the citizens had health care and schools and subsidized food, and everything was taken care of. And now it's absolutely destroyed. There are open-air slave markets, and there are armed groups running prisons, torturing detainees. And now, in the few times you do see them talk about it, the only thing they care about is potential Russian influence in the country. They don't care about creating a stable government, because that's not what they want. They just want to dominate and control. Let's go back a little bit. I think it's extremely important when we see what's happening in Syria to look back at Iraq, because the same lies that they used to justify their intervention in Iraq are being used against Syria right now. It was, I believe, the New York Times responsible for peddling the weapons of mass destruction lie. And not only that, but people don't remember, they also said Saddam had chemical weapons facilities, and that was used as justification to invade and carry out their humanitarian wars. And we are seeing those same exact lies used now against the government of Syria. And not only that, they continue to smear anyone who dares to speak about it. You see journalists labeled as Russian operatives or activists labeled as Russian operatives simply for being against the war. Let's go back to Iraq a little bit more there. 7 years after they if you can even declare it over, we saw ISIS take control of the city of Mosul. And ISIS ruled over Mosul for 2 years before they even bothered to initiate a liberation to help the people there. And how did they do it? They used chemical weapons, indiscriminate airstrikes, and some reports say 9,000 civilians died trying to liberate the city from ISIS control. ISIS would not have controlled the city of Mosul had the United States not invaded and destroyed the country. And I think figures say that that figure of 9,000 is actually more civilians died than actual ISIS fighters during the liberation. That would not have happened. And they want to do the same thing that they've done to from Libya and Iraq. They want to do that to Syria too. And we cannot let that happen. And now, what are they concerned about in Iraq again? Iranian and Russian influence. They don't care about creating a stable government. They just want to dominate and control. I think it's important to remember that the same tools that are used to carry out these wars are the same exact tools they use to oppress us here at home, too. Militarized police, the surveillance state, propaganda, all the lies they use to justify their wars come back here. It's not even just money for healthcare and schools. It's used, the same tools used to oppress nations abroad are used to oppress us here at home too. And that's why it's so important to oppose these wars, because it all comes back to us. Let's see. It's particularly disgusting to me when I look at the coverage on Syria, because I frequently cover Yemen, and all the lies they use to say the Syrian government does is exactly what the United States is doing in Yemen. They are not taking a passive role. It's not just happening. It's not just, oh, we don't know what the Saudis are doing. They know what they're doing. Chemical weapons, indiscriminate airstrikes, using starvation as a weapon. They're doing that to civilians in Yemen, and yet they try to use that as a justification to invade the sovereign nation of Syria, and we can't have that. Not only that, it's happening in Palestine as we speak right now. The US-backed Israeli military snipers are killing unarmed civilians and peaceful protesters, doing nothing but demanding their homes back. It's disgusting. That is exactly why we must oppose all US wars. We must stand with the people of Syria, Yemen, Libya, Iraq for peace. Thank you for having me.
Okay, I know you all want to march. We're going to have just one more speaker. We would be very remiss if we didn't have someone speaking about what's happening from a personal perspective, what's happening in Palestine right now. We don't hear about it in the news. I mentioned earlier, hundreds have been wounded by snipers, Israeli snipers firing on peaceful demonstrators, and at least 30 killed. And so with that, I'd like everyone here to give a warm welcome to Rania Salem of the U.S. Palestinian Community Network. Let's give it up for Rania.
Hello. One moment while I adjust the microphone. Hello, everyone. How are you today? Are you excited? Let's get excited, yeah? Okay, cool. Yesterday, we saw 30,000 people. We arrived prepared and with precise reinforcements. Nothing was carried out uncontrolled. Everything was accurate and measured. And we know where every bullet landed. Tweeted by the IDF on March 31st, 2018. تعرف قديش أنا بعاني لأهل غزة؟ تعرف قديش أنا بعاني لأهل وطني؟ Do you know what this means? Do you know what it means when you hear words like genocide, murder, and apartheid? Do you know how many Palestinians were killed today? تعرف قديش أنا بعاني لأهل وطني؟ Human suffering is not just a topic to be debated. Human suffering is not judged from a scale of 1 to 10. Human suffering is human suffering. Human lives are not so worthless to be deemed as collateral damage. We are not collateral damage. We are not test subjects for your Western colonial project. We are not numbers. We are not numbers. We are not numbers on your scale of how many were murdered today by your calculated bombing mistake. U.S. intervention is destructive, as the only thing it does is open up political vacuums, intensify political conflicts, incite violence, create incomprehensible instability, and destroy countries to the point of unsolvable complexity. All of this while they deem our countries as shitholes. The United States actively deems my Arab countries as backwards, when it is the United States that invades these countries or supports invasion forces that destroy our societies. U.S. intervention only advances U.S. interest. There is no such thing as humanitarian intervention. It's not about human rights. It's about U.S. profit. The United States dominates the world at the expense of the lives of people that look just like me, at the expense of the people that come from the middle, the south, and the east. I was born in this country and forced to watch it actively murder hundreds of thousands of innocent people all over the Middle East and deemed them collateral damage while I walked the hallways in my predominantly white institutions with my fellow classmates calling me terrorist at every chance that they got. I grew up in this country which funds billions to Israel to actively occupy, colonize, and brutally oppress my dear Palestinians on the daily. Israel is a settler colonial state and a murderous entity. The United States is giving Israel billions of dollars in foreign assistance, which heavily includes military assistance as well. The United States allows Israel to continue their occupation and colonization of Palestinian land. Israel is creating more settlements on stolen Palestinian land, using AK-47s, tear gas canisters, and bombs against innocent Palestinian people in refugee camps in Jerusalem and in the West Bank, and dropping chemical weapons like white phosphorus on Gaza. It does this with the support of the U.S. because the U.S. needs Israel to be its watchdog in the Arab world, to do its bidding and secure its interests. Gaza has become an open-air prison where the people are under siege and trapped with nowhere to escape as Israel keeps control of the skies, the borders, and the seas. Israel is killing off the people of Gaza and eliminating their hopes of future survival, as the U.S. and the rest of the West stands by watching and providing Israel with the money to do so. The United States is complicit in these calculated and prepared killings of my people. The U.S. and other Western imperialists do not have the right to decide the solutions for my people. Do not call us your two-state solution. Do not call us your complicated peace process. The future of the lives of my people is not your Nobel Peace Prize. Stay out of it and allow the indigenous people to decide their own futures and shape their own beloved countries. Peace does not exist within the hands of the occupier, and the United States, which funds my occupier, has no right to demand peace from the people that they are actively oppressing. These are people's lives. These are people's lives. These are people's lives. This is massacre. This is ethnic cleansing. This is what we call Israeli apartheid with the support of U.S. imperialism and U.S. aid to Israel. Please join us, USPCN, as we commemorate the 70th anniversary of the Palestinian Nakba, the catastrophe, when 800,000 of my people were kicked out of their homes to establish the settler colonialist state of Israel. The flyers are being distributed today, so meet us at Congress in Michigan on Friday, May 11th at 4:30 p.m. Thank you very much.
Okay, folks, as we get ready to start circulating, we're going to have someone send us off with a song. Earlier, you heard Andy talking about we have a major action planned to commemorate the 50th anniversary of the Democratic National Convention on August 25th. We have a performer who has been at this since 1968 and performed then and also performed at the NATO rally in 2012. Please welcome Margaret Nelson.
I'll correct that slightly. I got tear gassed in '68, and I marched with a puppet in 2012. So, Democratic Party called me yesterday. Democratic Party called me yesterday. Democratic Party called me yesterday. They wanted my donation, but all that I would say was stop the wars, bring back the Bill of Rights now. That's your line, it comes by. Stop the war, bring back the Bill of Rights now. We need money for schools, babies and moms. Money for seniors, babies and moms. Money for veterans, babies and moms. Don't waste tax dollars buying missiles and bombs. Just stop the wars, bring back the Bill of Rights now. Executives been using these wars as an excuse. Executives been using these wars as an excuse. Executives been using these wars as an excuse for low-down, dirty Constitution abuse. Just stop the war, bring back the Bill of Rights now. There are funny little noises on my phone line. Funny little noises on your phone line. Funny little noises on our phone lines. The NSA boys working overtime. Just stop the wars, bring back the Bill of Rights now. CIA walking in the middle of the night. CIA stalking in the middle of the night. CIA knocking in the middle of the night. Abduction and torture, you know it ain't right. Just stop the war, bring back the Bill of Rights now. FBI walking so early in the day. FBI stalking so early in the day. FBI knocking early in the day, harassing peace activists. What do you say? We say, stop the war, bring back the Bill of Rights now. So it's land of the brave and home of the free. Land of the brave, home of the free. Land of the brave, home of the free. Won't you Democrats stand up for democracy? Why don't you stop the wars, bring back the Bill of Rights now? I say stop the wars, bring back the Bill of Rights now.
Thank you. That was beautiful. People who are going to be carrying the banners, can you line up over here by where Andy just walked down to? We're going to proceed down Congress in just a second. Can I get free, free Palestine? Free, free Palestine. Free, free Palestine. Free, free Palestine. The U.S. lies, people die. U.S. lies. 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 All right, can we start to congregate over here to go down Congress? Andy's going to make a quick announcement.
Actually, not me.
Good afternoon, Chicago. Are you here for peace? I see many peace signs. Imagine peace. I do imagine peace. Very quickly, I have a 1-minute announcement for the HWPL organization. HWPL is one of the largest peace organizations. It's an NGO organization, and it's registered with the UN, the United Nations. And it's a very epical peace organization because it actually does the work of peace. And also, there's a chapter here in Chicago that's hosting a peace walk. It's hosting a peace walk next Saturday. HWPL, it organizes peace education all throughout the world, even into public schools as well, especially in India right now. So we'll do a peace walk to end gun violence, and it'll be held here at the Buckingham Palace. So I hope that all of you will join us and walk for peace. Thank you very much. Let us walk together.
Hey, hey, ho, ho.
Trump empire got to go, hey, hey. Ho, ho. Trump empire got to go, hey, hey. Ho, ho. Racist cops have got to go, hey, hey. Ho, ho. Racist cops have got to go, hey, hey. Ho, ho. Racist cops have got to go, hey, hey. Ho, ho.
We won't die in American wars. Revolution is the only fight we wait for. We won't die in American wars. Revolution is the only fight we wait for. We won't die in American wars. Revolution is the only fight we wait for. The fall of Trump's regime, they win! The fall of Trump's regime, they win! Demand the fall of Trump's regime! The people demand the fall of Trump's regime!